Life, wisdom.
Hi, I'm Dr. Colin Ross, a psychiatrist based in Dallas, and what I want to talk about today is schizophrenia and genetics. And the reason for this is it's commonly stated by psychiatrists that we know that schizophrenia is genetic. And the general public believes this, and it's something that's just known in our culture. But actually, in fact, it's not scientifically true. And this is proven by the statistics, by the research, by the data that's in psychiatry, in the journals, in the literature. So I want to give you just kind of what you need to know to evaluate this claim, schizophrenia is genetic. And first, just kind of the basics of genetics. So this is dad, and this is mom, and I'm just saying they all have, all the daughters, these 4 children, they're all girls. It wouldn't make any difference if it's some girls, some boys, or all boys. And what the parents have is a gene for schizophrenia. So there's the normal gene, which is the big S. They have one normal gene, and they have one abnormal gene, which is the small s. So they're called carriers. And when they have a kid, the father randomly can either contribute the large S version, the normal version, or the small s version. Same with the mother. In her egg, there can either be a normal big S version or the abnormal small s version, just by 50-50 random chance. So just randomly, one combination is big S from mom, big S from dad. You have somebody who's completely genetically normal. Or you could have small s from dad, small s from mom, somebody who's small s. Or the other combination is big S from dad, small s from mom, or small s from mom, big S from dad. So these people are called carriers. These people are genetically normal, and these people have the illness if it's a recessive illness. So this is basic genetics. So if both your parents are carriers, you've got a 1 in 4 chance of actually having the disease. You've got a 1 in 4 chance of being normal, and you've got a 50-50 chance of being a carrier. That's just basic genetics. And so the other pattern then is there's a dominant gene. And if you have the dominant gene, you have the illness. So this person's got the illness, this person's got the illness, this person's got the illness, and this is the only person who's unaffected. So there's the 2 basic inheritance patterns. One's called recessive, one's called dominant. And earlier in the 20th century, psychiatrists were trying to see, okay, is it this kind of simple inheritance pattern? Is there just one gene? Is it dominant, or is it recessive? And they found out there's clearly not just one gene. It's clearly not just dominant or just recessive. It's some sort of complicated genetic picture. So everybody's agreed then, and there's no debate on this point, that in schizophrenia, we're not looking at simple, basic genetics, one gene that's either dominant or recessive. So the next step in trying to understand all this is looking at twin studies. And what we have is identical twins. So we got 2 twins here, twin 1 and twin 2, and they're identical. They're monozygotic or MZ twins. Monozygotic is 1 egg. And then we've got 2 twins who are not identical. They are dizygotic. They come from 2 eggs, and they could be boy, girl, or one of each. And what we want to look at is what's called the concordance rate. So if we're looking at identical twins, if the first twin is female, we know that the other twin's going to be female 100% of the time. If the first twin we interview has blue eyes, 100% of the time blue eyes. So the concordance rate is 100%, meaning that when the first twin has a certain characteristic, what's the percentage of time that the other twin has it? And in non-identical twins, concordance will automatically be much lower because they're not identical. They only share half their DNA. So if something's genetic, you expect a high concordance here and a lower concordance here. But there's a catch. If you look at MZ twins and the first one speaks Chinese, and you ask, well, how often does the other one speak Chinese? If they've grown up in the same family, it's going to be 100%. So speaking Chinese runs in families, so does speaking German, so does speaking English, but it's not genetic at all. It's purely environmental. And concordance rate for native language is the same in DZ twins as it is in MZ twins. So this is kind of a first pass strategy. If concordance is very high in MZ twins, and it's higher than it is in DZ twins, it very well could be a genetic trait, but it's not necessarily. To figure out if it's really genetic, the next level of strategy is adoption studies. So you take some monozygotic twins who are Chinese. At birth, you adopt them into an English-speaking family, and lo and behold, they speak English. And that tells you that the English is coming from the environment, not from the genes. But when they're adopted into a Caucasian family, they remain physically Chinese, showing that that's coming from the genes. So that's how you try and sort that out. So if schizophrenia is genetic, one question we want to ask is, what are the concordance rates? That's going to be our first pass before we go to adoption. But there's another side to the logic. If the concordance rate is very low in schizophrenia, like 20 or 25%, then we know for sure it's at most only a little bit genetic. Because if it is genetic, it will be just like blue eyes, gender, it'll have 100% or close concordance. So, this 1997 or 98, there's a talk given by a leading geneticist at a conference, and he made the statement, most, if not all, the reason why schizophrenia runs in families is due to shared genes and not shared environment. That's the exact quote. Most, if not all, of the cause of schizophrenia is genetic. And then he described a study that he himself did, 31,000 pairs of twins that he followed for many, many years. And what was the concordance rate that he found? So if you're saying schizophrenia is a genetic illness, mostly if not all genetic, you better have a pretty high concordance to back that up. But what was the actual concordance rate? In his own study, when the first identical twin had schizophrenia, out of 16,000 pairs of twins, the other twin only had it 31% of the time. So and this is very typical when you add up the best studies in the literature, it comes out 31% or a little bit lower. When the first twin has schizophrenia, the other identical twin does not have it 70% of the time. This simple fact has been replicated. It's appeared in different countries and different studies, and it's been known scientifically as a fact for many decades. And you don't have to reanalyze or look for some sort of obscure study. This is right out front in the literature for decades in psychiatry. So if this was purely simple Mendelian genetics, there's just a gene for schizophrenia, if this twin has it, this twin will have it 100% of the time. If this twin doesn't have it, this twin will never have it. So psychiatrists now say, well, it's not that simple. It's not just one gene. It's a number of different genes all contributing a little bit. Doesn't matter. No matter how many genes there are contributing to schizophrenia, this twin has got a set of genes that causes him to have schizophrenia. This twin's got the same set. Whether it's 2 genes or 20 genes or 100 genes or 1,000,000 genes, doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter how many genes are involved in schizophrenia. This low concordance rate absolutely scientifically proves schizophrenia could be at most only a little genetic. That's simply what the scientific facts show. Now there's another consideration that comes in, which is called the equal environments assumption, which sounds all fancy, but it's actually a simple idea. The equal environments assumption states that the environment treats identical twins the same to the same degree that it treats non-identical twins the same. But that doesn't make any sense. Identical twins, they're always the same gender, so everybody treats them the same because they're the same gender. They often have first names that start with the same letter. They are mistaken for each other all the time. They're treated as an identical unit. They wear the same clothes. They have the same traits and characteristics. So anybody who's been around twins, it's obvious at a glance that identical twins get treated the same much more than non-identical twins. So even just from basic common sense and knowledge of life, we know that the equal environments assumption doesn't hold. There's also a large literature, social science kind of literature, investigating this, studying this, and demonstrating that the environment treats identical twins the same to a much greater degree than it treats non-identical twins the same. Why is this important? Because if there's a difference in concordance rates here, the biological genetic guys want this to be totally due to the genes. These people have a higher concordance because they're more genetically identical. And all of the difference between this group and this group can be explained by the genes, the genetic similarity. But for that to be true, you have to rule out that the difference between 31 and 6% is coming from the environment. If the equal environments assumption doesn't hold, you know the environment is treating these guys similarly to a much greater degree. So therefore, their increased concordance could be coming not from their genes, but from the environment treating them more the same. So that's another problem with the whole idea that even this low concordance rate demonstrates some amount of genetics in schizophrenia. And there's some other funny facts. For instance, the concordance rate in identical twins for schizophrenia is much higher in twins who had the same chorionic sac than twins who had two sacs, showing that there's something in the environment when you're inside your mom that's driving this. Also, the concordance rate for MZ twins is much higher in twins where the first index twin here has been diagnosed in a mental hospital than in twins who are out in the environment. So the idea that schizophrenia is a genetic illness is disproven totally by this low concordance. But there's a whole bunch of additional scientific conceptual problems that reduce this concordance even down further. So the true genetic concordance, nobody knows exactly what it is, but it could be like 20%, 10%, 15%. And the rest of the concordance is coming from the environment. And in this situation, the environment means everything. It's not just like the physical environment or the outside world. It's also everything that's going on inside your cells, inside your tissues, but outside the DNA itself. So the environment here can mean a toxic chemical that your mom ingested or was exposed to during pregnancy. So then we have this puzzling question. Why does the field of psychiatry know that schizophrenia is genetic? Why do the leading experts say it's predominantly genetic when the science clearly proves that's not true? Well, that's a question for another day, except that clearly the biological psychiatrists are very invested in the idea that schizophrenia is a genetic illness. They want that to be true. And so there's a couple of strategies to get around this basic fact. One is this attitude that we've gone beyond twin studies now. We're doing all kinds of Petri dish DNA analysis, and twin studies are like passé and old now. So you have to say we've gone beyond twin studies because the twin studies already disprove the idea that schizophrenia is genetic. So it's kind of poo-poo it, put it aside, say it's old-fashioned. And the other thing they do is there's different statistical machines, basically. One's called structural equation modeling. So they take this information, like 31%, 6%, put it in a computer, put a whole bunch of equations in there, put assumptions into the equation, and then the computer grinds through the data, and they come out with a statement like 83% of the variance is explained by genetic, not environmental factors. So you'll see these kind of statements. 83% of the cause of schizophrenia is due to genetic factors. It's just a statistical game. It's not a scientific fact. It's an artifact of how they've rigged the statistics. And when you go back to this basic information, 31% versus 6%, this proves that schizophrenia at most is just a little bit genetic. So if it was actually genetic, we know that concordance in identical twins would be 100%. We know that concordance in non-identical twins would be 50%. These are just the basic facts. Now you can argue that if it was a recessive disorder, maybe concordance would be lower in the DZ twins because they might not have exactly the same DNA. But you can't argue whether it's recessive, whether it's dominant, whether it's 1 gene, 5 genes, 100 genes, doesn't matter. This is only possible if it's mostly coming from the environment, which could be toxic chemicals, could be diet, could be vaccines, could be sexual abuse, could be difficulties in labor. There's a bazillion things it could be, but we know that schizophrenia is not a, quote, genetic illness. It simply is a scientific fact that it's mostly caused by the environment. And what I've just explained today, that's all the theory and knowledge of genetics you need to assess the literature, assess the basic facts, and reach that conclusion. So that's basically what I wanted to get across today. Thanks for listening.